Imagine standing near a river, calm water, quiet surroundings, and then, suddenly, the water catches fire. Yes, a river, burning, flames rising from the surface, thick black smoke filling the sky, and people watching in shock because something that should be impossible was happening right in front of them. This is not a movie. This is not fiction. This actually happened in the United States in the year 1969. A river became so polluted, so filled with toxic waste, that it literally caught fire. But here's the most shocking part. This wasn't the first time it happened. The river had burned before, again and again and again. So the question is, how does a river become so dangerous that it can burn like fuel? What kind of pollution turns water into something flammable? And why did it take so long for people to realize how serious the situation had become? Because what happened next didn't just shock America, it changed environmental laws forever. But before we get to that moment, we need to go back to a city built on industry, a city powered by factories, steel, and oil, a city where the river slowly turned into something deadly. That city was Cleveland, Ohio, and the river was called the Cuyahoga River. Before we continue, I want to ask you something. Do you think something like this could happen today? A river catching fire in the modern world? Let me know in the comments, because the next part of this story reveals something even more disturbing: how this river slowly became one of the most polluted rivers in America. By the early 1900s, Cleveland, Ohio had become one of the fastest-growing industrial cities in the United States. Factories lined the riverbanks, steel plants, oil refineries, chemical industries. All of them depended on the Cuyahoga River, but they weren't just using the river, they were dumping into it. Day after day, year after year, industrial waste poured directly into the water. Oil, chemicals, toxic sludge. At first, no one paid much attention. The river still flowed, ships still passed through, and the city continued to grow. But slowly, something began to change. The water turned darker, thicker. Strange smells filled the air. Residents living nearby started noticing it first. The river didn't look like water anymore. It looked like liquid waste. Sometimes the surface of the river would be covered in oily layers that shimmered under sunlight. Other times, debris and industrial waste floated across the surface like a moving landfill. And then came the fires. Small at first, almost ignored. A spark from a passing train or a piece of hot metal from a factory would land in the river, and suddenly flames would appear. The water itself would burn. But instead of stopping the pollution, the industries continued, because at that time there were very few environmental laws. Factories could dump waste directly into rivers without serious consequences. And as the years passed, the problem only got worse. By the 1950s and 60s, the Cuyahoga River had become one of the most polluted rivers in America. It was no longer just a river. It had become a mixture of oil, chemicals, and waste, a disaster waiting to happen. And then, in 1969, that disaster finally reached a breaking point. But before we continue, think about this. If you lived near a river that had already caught fire multiple times, would you stay there or would you leave? Let me know in the comments, because in the next part, we reach the moment that shocked the entire country, the day the river burst into flames once again. On June 22, 1969, the Cuyahoga River caught fire again. But this time, something was different. It started like many of the previous fires, a spark, possibly from a passing train or debris falling into the water, and within seconds, the surface of the river ignited. Bright orange fire burned on top of what should have been a flowing river. Thick black smoke rose into the sky. People nearby stopped and stared, because no matter how many times it had happened before, it still felt impossible to believe. A river on fire. The flames quickly grew stronger. Burning debris floated along the water. The fire moved beneath a railroad bridge, damaging its structure. Emergency crews rushed to the scene. Firefighters worked quickly to control the flames. But this wasn't a normal fire. They weren't fighting burning wood or buildings. They were trying to put out a fire on water. And within a short time, the flames were brought under control. But here's the shocking part. The fire itself didn't cause massive destruction. It wasn't the biggest fire the river had ever seen. In fact, compared to earlier fires, this one was relatively small. So why did this moment become so famous? Why did this fire change everything? Because this time, people were paying attention. Photos of the burning river began to spread. Newspapers started reporting the story, and soon, the entire country was asking the same question. How could something like this happen in America? How could a river become so polluted that it could catch fire? For many people, this was a wake-up call, a moment that forced the country to face a problem it had ignored for decades. But the real impact of this fire was just beginning, because what happened next would lead to one of the biggest environmental changes in U.S. history. Before we continue, I want to ask you something. What do you think is more dangerous, a polluted river you can see, or pollution that you can't see at all? After the fire in 1969, something unexpected happened. For the first time, people across the United States began to take the problem seriously. The images of a burning river shocked the nation. It wasn't just about Cleveland anymore. It was about the environment, about pollution, about the cost of ignoring a problem for too long. Newspapers and magazines picked up the story. One of the most influential moments came when Time magazine published an article describing the Cuyahoga River as a place where the water was so polluted it could no longer support life. Fish were gone. Wildlife had disappeared. The river had become a symbol of environmental failure, and people were angry. Citizens began demanding change. Protests started. Voices grew louder. The government could no longer ignore what was happening. And then, something historic happened. In 1970, the United States created a new organization, the Environmental Protection Agency, also known as the EPA. Its purpose was simple: to protect the environment and prevent disasters like this from happening again. Soon after that, new laws were introduced: the Clean Water Act, strict regulations on pollution, limits on what industries could dump into rivers. For the first time, companies were held responsible for environmental damage. And slowly, things began to change. The pollution didn't disappear overnight, but over time, the Cuyahoga River started to recover. The water became cleaner. Wildlife began to return. Fish were seen again in places where they had once disappeared. A river that once burned was slowly coming back to life. But this story leaves us with an important question. Why did it take something so extreme, a river catching fire, for people to finally take action? Could this disaster have been prevented earlier? Or do humans only act when things go too far? Think about that, because in the final part of this story, we'll look at where the river stands today and what this unbelievable event teaches us about the future. Today, the Cuyahoga River is no longer known as the river that burned. It is known as the river that recovered. After decades of effort, strict laws, and environmental awareness, the water is cleaner, fish have returned, wildlife has come back, and people can once again stand near the river without the smell of chemicals in the air. It's hard to imagine that this same river once caught fire. Not just once, but multiple times. What was once a symbol of pollution has now become a symbol of recovery. But the story of the Cuyahoga River is more than just history. It's a warning, a reminder of how far things can go when problems are ignored for too long. Because the truth is, this didn't happen overnight. It took years of pollution, years of neglect, years of people looking the other way. And it makes you wonder how many problems today are slowly building up just like this one once did. Problems we don't notice yet, but one day might become impossible to ignore. Before we end this video, I want to ask you one final question. Do you think something like this could happen again in today's world? Or have we truly learned from the past? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. I read every single one. And if this story surprised you or made you think, make sure to like this video. It helps more people discover these incredible stories. And if you enjoy videos like this, real history, strange disasters, and unbelievable true events, then make sure to subscribe to the channel, because there are many more stories like this coming. Stories you've probably never heard before. So don't miss the next one. I'll see you in the next video.